The emergency dispatcher's voice crackled through my truck radio just as I finished clearing the last section of Cedar Ridge Boulevard. And I nearly choked on my coffee when I heard what she was saying about a snow removal emergency at my own address. I had been up since 3 in the morning, which was nothing unusual for a Tuesday in January when you live in Burlington, Vermont, and a nor'easter decided to dump 18 inches of snow on us overnight. My name is Quentin Norwood, and I have 2 jobs that sometimes intersect in ways most people would not expect. By day, I am the postmaster for the Burlington Postal District, overseeing mail delivery operations for over 40,000 residents. By choice, and for extra income that helps me afford my mortgage in the expensive Maple Heights subdivision, I also run a small snow removal business with my 2 brothers. The irony of the situation was not lost on me as I listened to the dispatcher relay information about a frantic woman named Deborah calling 911 because someone was maliciously blocking mailboxes with snow. My mailbox. My street. The same street where I had just spent 2 hours carefully plowing every driveway and public area, making sure our neighborhood could function after the massive snowstorm. I grabbed my radio and responded to dispatch. This is Quentin Norwood. I am actually the property owner at that address and also the local postmaster. There is no emergency. I authorized the snow removal operations myself. The dispatcher sounded relieved. Copy that, Mr. Norwood. Should I cancel the emergency response? Please do. I will head back to the address now and sort this out. I shook my head, already knowing who Deborah was. Deborah Patterson, the self-appointed president of the Maple Heights Homeowners Association, had been a thorn in my side since I moved into the neighborhood 3 years ago. She was a 52-year-old woman with short blonde hair that she kept in that particular style that seemed to be a requirement for complaining to managers everywhere. And she had opinions about everything from the shade of beige you could paint your shutters to the exact height your grass should be maintained. I turned my truck around, the large plow blade scraping slightly against the asphalt as I maneuvered back toward my street. The subdivision was relatively new, built only about 7 years ago, with identical colonial-style homes that the HOA insisted remain as uniform as possible. Mine was a 3-bedroom place on the corner of Maple and Cedar, which meant I had extra sidewalk responsibility but also a larger yard that I actually enjoyed maintaining, despite Deborah's constant scrutiny. When I pulled up to my house, I saw exactly what I expected. Deborah stood in my driveway, wearing a puffy purple coat that made her look like an angry grape, gesticulating wildly at my mailbox while talking to 2 other women I recognized from HOA meetings. Linda Morrison and Susan Chen were her usual backup singers, always nodding along to whatever Deborah said, never quite brave enough to voice their own opinions but happy to support hers. I parked the truck and climbed out, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. The morning sun was just starting to break through the clouds, making the white landscape almost blindingly bright. Quentin, Deborah's voice cut through the cold air like a knife. Do you have any idea what you have done? This is completely unacceptable. You have buried the mailboxes under 3 feet of snow. How is anyone supposed to receive their mail? I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper would not help anything. Good morning to you too, Deborah. I see you called 911 about snow removal. I certainly did. This is an emergency. The entire neighborhood's mail service is compromised. She stomped her foot, which would have been more dramatic if she had not immediately slipped slightly on the icy driveway. Linda grabbed her arm to steady her. Deborah, I am the postmaster. I approved this snow removal plan myself. The mail trucks cannot operate safely when there is 18 inches of unplowed snow. We always plow the streets first, which temporarily means some snow gets pushed near the mailboxes. My crew will come back this afternoon to clear the mailbox approaches specifically. This is standard operating procedure for every major snowstorm. Susan spoke up for the first time. But the HOA bylaws state that mailbox access must be maintained at all times. I pulled out my phone and opened the email app. Actually, I have the federal regulations right here that supersede HOA bylaws. United States Postal Service regulations require that carriers are not obligated to deliver mail if they cannot safely access the mailbox. That includes situations where snow and ice create hazardous conditions. As postmaster, I have the authority to authorize temporary service modifications during extreme weather events. Deborah's face was turning red, which clashed terribly with her purple coat. You cannot just make up rules to suit yourself. I am not making up anything. Would you like me to forward you the USP's handbook section on winter weather protocols? I literally wrote the implementation plan for our district based on federal guidelines. I was trying to keep my voice level, but 3 hours of sleep and Deborah's attitude were testing my patience. The HOA has authority over all external property modifications and maintenance. Deborah pulled out a folder that she apparently carried with her everywhere. According to Article 7, Section 3 of our bylaws, any activity that affects the aesthetic appearance or functionality of mailbox installations requires prior written approval from the HOA board. Deborah, this is emergency snow removal, not a property modification. I do not need HOA permission to plow snow from public streets. I gestured at the road. The street is public property maintained by the city. The snow removal is necessary for public safety. Your bylaws do not override federal postal regulations or municipal snow emergency procedures. Linda finally spoke, her voice timid. Maybe we should discuss this at the next HOA meeting. There is nothing to discuss. Deborah snapped at her own supporter. This is a clear violation and there will be consequences. She turned back to me, jabbing her finger in my direction. You will receive a formal citation from the HOA, and you will be fined $500 per day until this situation is rectified. I could not help but laugh, which was apparently the wrong reaction. You want to fine me for plowing snow? Deborah, you need to understand something. Federal law trumps HOA regulations. You cannot fine me for following Postal Service protocols. If anything, you could be charged with interfering with mail delivery, which is actually a federal offense. Her eyes widened, but not with fear, with rage. Are you threatening me? I am explaining the law. You called 911, which ties up emergency services during an actual emergency situation when first responders need to help people who are really in danger. You are now threatening to fine me for performing my job duties as postmaster. Both of these actions could have serious consequences for you. Susan whispered something to Linda, and they both took a small step back from Deborah. I noticed a few neighbors had come out onto their porches, clearly interested in the drama unfolding in my driveway. Deborah was not backing down. I want to see your supervisor. Give me the contact information for whoever oversees your position. That would be the district manager in Montpelier, but I am happy to provide that information. I should warn you that filing a frivolous complaint against a postmaster for following federal regulations is not going to end the way you think it will. We will see about that. Deborah spun on her heel, nearly slipped again, and marched toward her Mercedes SUV that was parked on the street. Linda and Susan scurried after her like ducklings following their mother. I watched them drive away and noticed my neighbor from across the street, an older gentleman named Robert Martinez, walking over with a slight smile on his face. "That was entertaining," Robert said. "She has been driving around since 6 this morning, taking pictures of everyone's mailboxes and muttering about violations." "Of course she has." I rubbed my temples. "Robert, when my crew comes back this afternoon to clear the mailbox approaches, can you let everyone know? I want to make sure people understand this is temporary." "Will do. Most folks around here appreciate what you do, Quentin. We know Deborah is just looking for problems where there are none." He paused. "Though I would watch your back. She has been on a warpath lately. Something about the HOA budget not passing the way she wanted at the last meeting." That was interesting information. I had missed the last HOA meeting because of a postal service conference in Boston. But I had heard rumors that Deborah wanted to increase the annual fees significantly to fund some landscaping project that most residents opposed. I thanked Robert and headed inside my house. My dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit, greeted me enthusiastically, clearly wondering why I had been outside for so long without him. I fed him breakfast and made myself some eggs while checking my work email on my laptop. Sure enough, there was already a message from Deborah, sent to my official postal service email address, demanding an immediate meeting with my supervisor and threatening legal action if the mailboxes were not cleared within 2 hours. She had CC'd about 15 people, including the mayor of Burlington, the city council members, and what appeared to be a reporter from the Burlington Free Press. I forwarded the email to my actual supervisor, District Manager Patricia Hamilton, with a brief explanation of the situation. Patricia was a no-nonsense woman who had been with the Postal Service for 30 years and had seen every type of complaint imaginable. Her response came back within 15 minutes. "Handle it per standard protocol. Document everything. If she continues to harass you or interfere with postal operations, let me know and we will involve the Postal Inspection Service. You have full authority to manage snow removal as needed." The Postal Inspection Service was essentially the law enforcement arm of the USPS, and they took interference with mail delivery very seriously. I hoped it would not come to that, but I appreciated having the backup. I spent the rest of the morning at the main post office, coordinating with my carriers about route modifications due to the snow. Several residential streets were still impassable, and we had to temporarily hold mail for about 200 addresses until the city crews could clear them. This was normal procedure, and most people understood. Around noon, my brother Jake called me. He and my other brother Marcus ran the actual day-to-day operations of our snow removal business while I handled the administrative side and helped out during major storms. "Hey, we are getting ready to do the mailbox clearing passes, but we have a problem." Jake sounded annoyed. "There is a woman parked in front of your mailbox with some kind of camera setup. She says she is documenting illegal snow removal activities, and we are not allowed to touch any mailboxes on the street. Let me guess. Purple coat, blonde hair, looks like she wants to speak to a manager." That is exactly right. She also has copies of HOA bylaws that she keeps trying to hand to us. Marcus told her to move her car or we would plow around her, and she threatened to call the police. I checked my watch. "I will be there in 20 minutes. Do not engage with her. Just move to another street and circle back." When I arrived at Maple Heights for the second time that day, the scene was even more absurd than I had imagined. Deborah had indeed set up what looked like a professional camera on a tripod, pointed at the mailboxes. She was filming, and she had been joined by 2 other HOA board members I vaguely recognized from the monthly newsletters. I parked behind my brother's truck and walked over. "Deborah, you need to move your vehicle and your equipment. You are blocking snow removal operations. I am documenting your continued violations, she gestured at the camera. This footage will be presented at an emergency HOA meeting tonight, and we will be voting on your removal from the neighborhood. That stopped me. My removal. You cannot force someone to sell their home because of a snow removal dispute. Article 12 of the HOA bylaws allows for forced sale if a homeowner repeatedly violates community standards and creates a public nuisance. She smiled, clearly thinking she had won something. I pulled out my phone and opened the HOA bylaws document. I had read the entire thing when I bought the house, specifically because I knew HOAs could be problematic. Article 12 requires a 75% vote from all homeowners, not just board members, and only applies to violations that have gone through the proper citation and appeal process. You cannot just declare an emergency meeting and vote someone out. We have the authority to call emergency meetings when there is an immediate threat to the community. There is no immediate threat. There is snow that is being removed according to federal postal regulations and municipal emergency procedures. You are the one creating a nuisance by blocking the snow removal crew from doing their job. One of the other board members, a tall man wearing an expensive-looking ski jacket, stepped forward. Mr. Norwood, I am Gerald Hutchinson, HOA Vice President. Perhaps we can find a compromise here. What if your crew clears the mailboxes immediately, and we agree to table any discussion of violations? At least someone was trying to be reasonable. Gerald, that is literally what we are here to do. My crew has been trying to clear the mailboxes for the past 30 minutes, but Deborah is physically blocking them from accessing the area. Deborah turned on Gerald. We discussed this. You agreed that we needed to take a hard stance on unauthorized activities. I agreed we should talk to him, not set up surveillance equipment and block snow removal. Gerald looked uncomfortable. Deborah, I think maybe you are taking this a bit too far. Too far. He called me a criminal. I said interfering with mail delivery is a federal offense, which is a factual statement, not a personal attack. I was tired of this conversation and tired of standing in the cold. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to move your car and your camera. My crew is going to clear the mailbox approaches. Mail delivery will resume normal operations tomorrow. If you want to file a complaint with the Postal Service, you have every right to do that, but you need to go through the proper channels. And if I refuse to move, then I call the Burlington Police Department, explain that you are interfering with federal mail operations and blocking snow removal during a declared snow emergency, and they will move you. You will likely receive citations for obstruction. Your choice. The other board member, a woman whose name I could not remember, whispered urgently to Deborah. The city did declare a snow emergency. She is right about that. We could get fined. Deborah's face went through several interesting color changes. Finally, she said, "This is not over. The emergency HOA meeting is still happening tonight at 7 p.m. at the community center. I expect you to be there to answer for your actions." I will be there. I was not about to let her spin this situation to the other homeowners without my side of the story being heard. She packed up her camera with much more force than necessary, nearly dropping it twice, and got into her Mercedes. The other board members followed in their own vehicles, leaving Gerald standing there looking apologetic. She has been under a lot of stress, Gerald said weakly. That is not an excuse for harassment or interfering with federal operations, but I appreciate you trying to de-escalate. I nodded to Jake and Marcus, who immediately got to work clearing the snow from around the mailboxes. Gerald hesitated, then said, "Between you and me, a lot of homeowners are getting tired of Deborah's approach. She means well, but she treats every minor issue like it is a constitutional crisis. The stuff about forcing you to sell your home is nonsense. That provision has never been used in the history of this HOA, and it would never get the votes needed. I appreciate you telling me that. I will see you tonight at the meeting. He left, and I helped my brothers finish the mailbox clearing. It took about 45 minutes to do the entire neighborhood properly, making sure there were clear approaches for both the mail carriers and the residents who needed to access their mailboxes. Mrs. Chen, who was actually Susan's mother-in-law and not related to the HOA drama, came out with a thermos of hot chocolate for us when we finished her section. "You boys are doing the Lord's work. My Susan says Deborah is having a fit about all this, but we appreciate being able to get our mail." "Just doing our job, Mrs. Chen. Stay warm." I accepted the hot chocolate gratefully. By 3 p.m., the entire neighborhood was properly cleared. I went home, took a hot shower, and tried to prepare myself for what I knew was going to be a ridiculous HOA meeting. I called Patricia Hamilton, my supervisor, and gave her a full update on the situation. She laughed when I got to the part about the camera setup. "Quentin, I have been doing this for 3 decades, and I have never had someone try to film snow removal as evidence of a crime. Document everything. Keep copies of all communications, and if she shows up at the post office or tries to interfere with actual mail delivery, you call me immediately. I will have the Postal Inspection Service pay her a visit that she will not forget." That evening, I arrived at the Maple Heights Community Center at 6:45. The parking lot was surprisingly full. Apparently, word had spread about the drama, and people were interested in seeing how this played out. The community center was a modern building with a large meeting room that could hold about 150 people. The HOA meetings were usually sparsely attended, maybe 20 people at most, but tonight there had to be at least 80 residents crowded into the space. Deborah was at the front of the room, setting up her laptop and projector. She had dressed up for the occasion, wearing a business suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Linda and Susan flanked her like bodyguards, arranging papers and whispering to each other. I grabbed a seat in the middle section, not too close to the front, but not hiding in the back either. Robert Martinez sat down next to me, along with several other neighbors I recognized from the street. "This should be good," Robert muttered. "I heard she has a whole presentation prepared." Of course she does. I noticed several people were filming on their phones, which was allowed according to HOA rules as long as meetings remained open to all homeowners. At exactly 7 p.m., Deborah called the meeting to order by banging a gavel that seemed unnecessarily large. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We are here tonight to address a serious violation of HOA bylaws and a threat to our community standards." She clicked her remote, and a photo of my truck with the plow blade appeared on the projection screen. It was clearly taken this morning, showing the snow pushed up near the mailboxes. This morning, a resident of Maple Heights took it upon himself to conduct unauthorized snow removal that left our mailboxes completely inaccessible. When confronted about this violation, he became aggressive and threatened HOA board members with federal charges. The audience murmured. I kept my expression neutral, knowing my turn to speak would come. Deborah continued, showing more photos. Some of them were actually quite dramatic, making the snow piles look much larger than they actually were thanks to the camera angles. As you can see, this created a dangerous situation. What if someone had a medical emergency and needed to access their mailbox for prescription medications? What if important legal documents could not be delivered? Someone in the front row raised their hand. But did not the snow make the mailboxes inaccessible anyway? I mean, before anyone plowed. Deborah ignored the question. The issue is not the snow itself, but the unauthorized nature of the removal and the subsequent blocking of mailbox access. Article 7, Section 3 clearly states that any modifications to mailbox installations require prior approval. Gerald Hutchinson, sitting on the board panel, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Deborah, I think we should let Mr. Norwood explain his side before we continue with accusations. The evidence speaks for itself. Actually, I think people would like to hear from him. This came from a woman I did not recognize in the back row, and several people voiced agreement. Deborah's jaw tightened, but she could not refuse without looking unreasonable. Fine. Mr. Norwood, would you like to explain why you felt entitled to ignore HOA regulations? I stood up and walked to the front of the room, pulling out my phone. Thank you. I would like to start by introducing myself properly for those who do not know me. My name is Quentin Norwood, and I am the postmaster for the Burlington Postal District. I oversee mail delivery operations for over 40,000 residents, including everyone in this room. I saw several people react with surprise. Clearly, not everyone had known about my day job. Last night, we received 18 inches of snow from a nor'easter. The city of Burlington declared a snow emergency, which requires all streets to be cleared as quickly as possible for public safety. I also run a small snow removal business with my brothers, and we have contracts with several neighborhoods, including Maple Heights, to clear streets and driveways after major storms. I connected my phone to the projector, overriding Deborah's presentation. She made a sound of protest, but I continued. This is the official United States Postal Service protocol for winter weather operations, which I am authorized to implement as postmaster. Section 4.2 states that during major snow events, carriers are not required to deliver mail if they cannot safely access mailboxes. Street clearing takes priority to allow emergency vehicles and mail trucks to operate. I showed the next slide. This is the standard snow removal procedure that has been used by municipalities across Vermont for decades. Streets are plowed first, which temporarily pushes snow toward the curbs and mailboxes. Secondary crews then come through to clear mailbox approaches specifically. This entire process usually takes 4 to 6 hours, depending on the size of the area. But you did not inform the HOA, Deborah interjected. I was not required to inform the HOA. Snow removal during a declared emergency is not a modification to property. It is emergency maintenance of public infrastructure. I clicked to another slide. This is an email from my supervisor, District Manager Patricia Hamilton, confirming that my actions were in full compliance with Postal Service regulations. I also have documentation from the Burlington Department of Public Works confirming that our snow removal followed city protocols. I looked around the room. My crew finished clearing the mailbox approaches at approximately 3 p.m. today. Normal mail delivery will resume tomorrow morning. At no point was anyone's mail service genuinely threatened, because mail cannot be delivered through 18 inches of snow, regardless of whether the streets are plowed or not. An older man in the front row raised his hand. So the mailboxes were only blocked for a few hours, and it was always the plan to clear them. Exactly. This is standard procedure after every major snowstorm. It has happened at least a dozen times since I moved to this neighborhood 3 years ago. The only difference this time is that Mrs. Patterson decided to call 911 and claim it was an emergency. It was an emergency. Deborah stood up. You blocked access to federal property. Mailboxes are not federal property. They are owned by the individual homeowners. The mail inside them is protected by federal law, but the boxes themselves are private property. And even if they were federal property, temporary inaccessibility due to snow removal during an emergency is completely legal. I was tired of her twisting facts. What is not legal is calling 911 for a non-emergency situation, which ties up emergency services when they might be needed for actual emergencies like medical crises or accidents. Gerald spoke up. "Did you actually call 911, Deborah?" I called to report a public safety concern. During a snowstorm, when emergency services are already stretched thin dealing with actual emergencies. I pulled up another document on the projector. This is the Burlington Police Department's definition of appropriate 911 usage. Snow removal is specifically listed as a non-emergency issue unless someone is actively trapped or injured. The room erupted in conversation. I could see that public opinion was not swinging in Deborah's favor. A woman in her 30s stood up. "I just want to say that I really appreciate Quentin and his brothers for clearing our streets so quickly. I have a 2-year-old and needed to get to the pediatrician this afternoon. If the streets had not been cleared, I would not have been able to go." Several other people voiced similar sentiments. Robert stood up and said, "I have lived in this neighborhood since it was built, and Deborah, with all due respect, you are making a mountain out of a molehill. The man did his job. Our streets are clear. Our mailboxes are accessible. What exactly are we voting on here?" Deborah's face was getting that dangerous red color again. "We are voting on whether to issue a citation for violation of HOA bylaws, and whether to pursue further action against Mr. Norwood for his disrespectful and threatening behavior toward board members." "I would like to address that accusation," I said calmly. "This morning, when Mrs. Patterson confronted me about the snow removal, I explained federal postal regulations and mentioned that interfering with mail delivery is a federal offense. That is not a threat. That is a factual statement. I also informed her that misusing 911 services can result in citations. Again, that is a fact, not a threat." Linda, who had been silent this whole time, suddenly spoke up. "He did not yell or act aggressively. He was actually pretty calm, even when you were, pretty upset, Deborah." Deborah turned on her like a betrayed monarch. "Excuse me. I am just saying he was not threatening. He was just explaining the rules." Linda looked like she immediately regretted speaking, but the damage was done. Susan added quietly, "She is right. He was polite." We were the ones who were kind of confrontational. I could see Deborah's entire power structure crumbling. Gerald seized the moment. "I move that we table this discussion indefinitely, as there does not appear to be any actual violation of HOA bylaws or community standards. All in favor?" At least 50 hands went up immediately. "Opposed?" Deborah, Susan, and Linda raised their hands. A few other people did as well, but it was clear the majority sided against pursuing action. Motion passes. This matter is closed. Gerald looked relieved, but Deborah was not finished. She stood up, shaking with anger. "You people do not understand what you are doing. If we do not enforce our bylaws strictly, this entire neighborhood will fall apart. Property values will plummet. We will become just another average subdivision with no standards." "Deborah, maybe you should sit down," Gerald said gently. "No, I will not sit down. I have dedicated 3 years of my life to making this community the best it can be, and this is how you repay me. By siding with someone who flagrantly ignores our rules and threatens board members." She pointed at me. "You think you are so special because you are a postmaster. You think federal law makes you above the HOA. I think federal law actually does supersede HOA bylaws, yes. That is how the legal system works." I kept my voice level, even though she was clearly having some kind of meltdown. I want you out of this neighborhood. I will find a way to make that happen. That crossed a line. Robert stood up. Deborah, that is enough. You are talking about harassing a homeowner for doing his job. That is not what this HOA is about. The HOA is about maintaining standards. The HOA is about managing common areas and making sure our neighborhood functions well, Gerald corrected. It is not about targeting individual homeowners because you personally disagree with their profession or their emergency response to a snowstorm. Deborah grabbed her laptop and her papers. I am done with this. I am done with all of you. You clearly do not appreciate everything I do. She stormed out of the community center, leaving Linda and Susan scrambling to gather the remaining materials. The meeting dissolved into chaos as everyone started talking at once. Gerald banged the gavel several times to restore order. All right, everyone, let us take a breath here. The immediate issue is resolved. Quentin, thank you for explaining the situation clearly. For everyone else, please remember that our next regular meeting is scheduled for February 15th, and we will be discussing the landscaping budget at that time. People started filtering out, and several neighbors came up to shake my hand or thank me for the snow removal. One man, who introduced himself as David Park, said he was an attorney, and if I had any further trouble with the HOA, he would be happy to help pro bono because he was so tired of Deborah's overreach. I thanked him and headed out to my truck. It was nearly 9 p.m., and I still had to be at the post office by 6 a.m. tomorrow to coordinate the backlog of mail that had accumulated during the storm. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I arrived at the post office to find Deborah waiting in the parking lot. She was alone this time, sitting in her Mercedes with the engine running. When she saw me, she got out and approached. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was calmer than yesterday, but there was something unsettling about her expression. "Deborah, I really do not think there is anything more to discuss. The HOA voted to table the issue. It is over." "It is not over. You humiliated me in front of the entire neighborhood." I defended myself against false accusations. There is a difference. You made me look like an idiot. I think you might have done that yourself when you called 911 about snow removal. I immediately regretted saying it, but the words were already out, her hands clenched into fists. I am going to file a formal complaint with the Postal Service. I am going to contact every person you supervise and let them know how you abuse your authority. I am going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. That was when I knew this had moved beyond a simple HOA dispute. This was harassment. Deborah, I am going to say this once very clearly. If you interfere with postal operations, contact my employees inappropriately, or continue to harass me, I will file a formal complaint with the police and pursue a restraining order. Additionally, the Postal Inspection Service takes interference with postal employees very seriously. You do not want them involved. You cannot threaten me. I am not threatening you. I am informing you of the consequences of your proposed actions. Now please leave this property. This is a federal facility, and you have no business being here. She stared at me for a long moment, and I genuinely could not tell what she was thinking. Then she got back in her Mercedes and drove away. I immediately went inside and called Patricia Hamilton. I explained the confrontation in the parking lot and my concerns about escalating harassment. Send me a written summary of everything that has happened, including dates, times, and witnesses. I am going to loop in the Postal Inspection Service now, before this gets worse. We have had situations like this before where someone becomes fixated on a postal employee, and it never de-escalates on its own. I spent the next hour writing a detailed incident report while also managing the mail sorting operations. By noon, I had a call from Inspector Marcus Webb of the Postal Inspection Service. He wanted to meet with me that afternoon to discuss the situation. Inspector Webb was a serious man in his early 40s, wearing a dark suit and carrying a badge that identified him as federal law enforcement. We met in my office at the post office, and I walked him through everything that had happened, showing him the emails, the photos I had taken of Deborah blocking the snow removal, and the incident report from this morning. "Has she made any direct threats against you?" he asked, taking notes. "Not explicit threats, no. But this morning she said she was going to contact my employees and my supervisors to, quote, let them know what kind of person I really are. She also said she was going to make sure everyone knows, which I interpret as an intention to launch some kind of campaign against me. That could constitute harassment and interference with a federal employee performing their duties. The issue is that she has not actually done anything yet beyond the 911 call and the confrontation at the HOA meeting, both of which are problematic but not necessarily criminal. So what are my options? Document everything. If she shows up at your home or workplace again, call the police immediately. If she contacts any postal employees or interferes with mail operations in any way, contact me directly." He handed me his card. "I am also going to pay her a visit this afternoon, just to make it clear that federal law enforcement is aware of the situation. Sometimes that is enough to make people realize they are out of their depth." I thanked him and tried to get back to my normal work. But I could not shake the feeling that this was not over. That evening, my phone rang just as I was sitting down to dinner. It was Gerald Hutchinson. "Quentin, I am sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. Deborah has resigned from the HOA board effective immediately. She sent an email to all the board members this afternoon saying she could not continue to work with people who did not respect her authority." "I see. Was this before or after she got a visit from a federal inspector?" "What?" I explained about the Postal Inspection Service getting involved. Gerald whistled. "She did not mention that in her email. She just said she was resigning and that the neighborhood would regret not listening to her." "That sounds ominous. It is Deborah. Everything sounds ominous with her, but honestly, I think most of the board is relieved. She has been increasingly difficult to work with over the past year. This snow removal thing was just the last straw." We talked for a few more minutes about HOA business, and Gerald mentioned they would need to hold elections for a new president soon. I politely declined when he suggested I should run, saying my schedule with the Postal Service was already too demanding. I thought, again, that this was the end of it. 2 days later, I was proven wrong in the worst possible way. I was at home on my day off, catching up on laundry and paperwork when there was a loud banging on my door. I opened it to find 2 Burlington police officers standing on my porch. "Quentin Norwood?" the older officer asked. "Yes, that is me. What is this about?" "We need you to come down to the station to answer some questions. There has been an accusation of assault." My stomach dropped. "Assault? Against who?" "Deborah Patterson. She filed a report this morning claiming you physically assaulted her in the parking lot of the post office 3 days ago." I could not believe what I was hearing. "That is completely false. There were security cameras in that parking lot. The footage will show that I never touched her." "That is why we need you to come to the station, so we can sort this out. You are not under arrest, but we need to investigate the accusation." I grabbed my jacket and my phone, texting my brother Jake to let him know what was happening. At the police station, I was taken to an interview room where I gave a complete statement about the parking lot confrontation. I mentioned that the post office had security cameras and that Inspector Webb from the Postal Inspection Service had already been investigating harassment concerns. The detective handling the case, a woman named Detective Sarah Morrison, listened carefully and took detailed notes. "Mr. Norwood, I am going to be straight with you. This does not sound credible based on what you are telling me, but we have to investigate. Can you give me contact information for Inspector Webb and for your supervisor who can verify your version of events?" I provided everything she asked for. She left me in the interview room for about 30 minutes, which felt like hours. When she came back, she had a slight smile on her face. "Good news. We pulled the security footage from the post office. It clearly shows the entire interaction, and you never made physical contact with Mrs. Patterson. You are free to go and no charges will be filed." "What about her? She filed a false police report. We will be speaking with her about that. Making a false report is a misdemeanor in Vermont, and we take it seriously." I left the police station feeling drained. This whole situation had spiraled so far beyond a simple HOA dispute. I called Inspector Webb and updated him on what had happened. "That was incredibly stupid of her," he said bluntly. "Filing a false report against a federal employee during an ongoing investigation. I am going to recommend charges for obstruction and harassment. The U.S. Attorney's Office will make the final decision, but this is well beyond HOA drama now." Over the next week, things moved quickly. The Postal Inspection Service conducted a formal investigation and interviewed multiple witnesses, including Gerald, Linda, Susan, and several neighbors who had witnessed the original confrontation. The security footage from the post office parking lot was entered as evidence, along with recordings of the 911 call and Deborah's threatening emails. The Burlington Police Department charged Deborah with filing a false report, and the U.S. Attorney's Office decided to pursue federal charges for harassment of a federal employee and interference with postal operations. Apparently, Deborah had also sent several letters to the homes of postal carriers who worked routes in Maple Heights, making wild accusations about corruption and abuse of power. That was what pushed the case into clearly criminal territory. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for March. I had to testify about everything that had happened, from the original snow removal incident through the false assault accusation. Deborah showed up with a lawyer who tried to argue that she was simply exercising her rights as an HOA president, and that the charges were retaliation for her standing up for community standards. The judge was not impressed. He noted that calling 911 for snow removal, filing a false police report, and sending harassing letters to federal employees had nothing to do with legitimate HOA business. He ordered Deborah to have no contact with me or any postal employee, and set a trial date for May. The trial itself was almost anticlimactic. The evidence was overwhelming. The security footage showed conclusively that I had never assaulted Deborah. The recordings of the 911 call demonstrated that she had lied about an emergency. The letters she sent to postal carriers contained factually false accusations and clear attempts to interfere with their work. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been under extreme stress and made poor decisions, but the prosecutor pointed out that her actions were part of a sustained campaign of harassment that lasted weeks and involved multiple criminal acts. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced Deborah to 6 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the city of Burlington for the costs of the false 911 call and investigation, and to the Postal Service for the investigative costs. As she was led out of the courtroom, Deborah looked at me with pure hatred. I felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. This entire situation had been so unnecessary. If she had just let me do my job that snowy morning, none of this would have happened. In the months that followed, life in Maple Heights slowly returned to normal. The HOA elected a new president, a retired teacher named Margaret Foster, who had a much more reasonable approach to community management. She actually called me before the next big snowstorm to ask about the timing of snow removal operations, not to challenge them, but to help coordinate communication with residents. Gerald remained as vice president and apologized multiple times for not standing up to Deborah sooner. I told him there was nothing to apologize for, and that the situation had taught everyone valuable lessons about the limits of HOA authority. Linda and Susan both resigned from the HOA board, saying they wanted to focus on other things. I suspected they were embarrassed about their roles in the initial confrontation, but I harbored no ill will toward them. They had been following Deborah's lead and had ultimately told the truth when it mattered. The neighborhood itself became more cohesive. The drama had forced people to actually read the HOA bylaws and understand what the organization could and could not do. Several committees were formed to handle specific issues like landscaping and events, taking the burden off any single person and preventing future power trips. My snow removal business actually grew because of the publicity. Several other neighborhoods reached out asking if I could service their areas, and I had to hire 2 additional crew members to keep up with demand. The irony that Deborah's attempt to destroy my reputation actually helped my business was not lost on me. At the post office, things continued smoothly. Patricia Hamilton retired that summer, and I was promoted to her position as district manager. It was a significant step up in responsibility, but I felt ready for the challenge. My first major decision in the new role was to implement clearer protocols for dealing with residents who interfered with postal operations, using my experience with Deborah as a case study for training new postmasters. Inspector Webb and I stayed in touch. He told me that the Postal Inspection Service had seen an uptick in harassment cases against postal employees, often related to HOA disputes or other neighborhood conflicts. He asked if I would be willing to speak at training sessions for new inspectors about how to recognize and document harassment patterns. I agreed, figuring that if my experience could help protect other postal workers, then something good would come from all the drama. The following winter, when the first major snowstorm hit, I made sure to send a detailed email to all Maple Heights residents explaining the snow removal timeline and the reasons for the temporary mailbox blocking. Margaret Foster forwarded it to the entire HOA mailing list with a note thanking me for the clear communication. The snow removal went off without a hitch. Mailboxes were temporarily blocked for about 4 hours, then cleared by my crew. No one called 911. No one set up surveillance cameras. No one accused me of federal crimes. It was gloriously boring. Robert Martinez invited me over for coffee after the snow was cleared, and we stood on his porch watching kids play in the snow piles. "You know," he said, "for a while there I was worried Deborah was going to burn your house down or something. She really lost it. I think she had deeper issues than just control problems. The HOA stuff was just an outlet for whatever else was going on in her life." "That is generous of you, considering what she put you through." I shrugged. "I try not to carry anger around. It is exhausting. She is serving her time, and hopefully she will get some help. Meanwhile, I have a job I love, a neighborhood that mostly appreciates what I do, and a good dog who does not care about HOA bylaws." As if on cue, Biscuit barked from inside my house, probably demanding his afternoon walk. Speaking of which, I should go take care of him. Thanks for the coffee, Robert. Anytime, and Quentin. I am glad you moved to this neighborhood. Most of us are too. That evening, as I walked Biscuit through the cleared streets of Maple Heights, I reflected on everything that had happened. It had been one of the strangest and most stressful experiences of my life, all because I plowed some snow during a storm. But it had also taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation and following proper procedures, and about how quickly reasonable disagreements can spiral into something much more serious when ego and authority get involved. I thought about Deborah sometimes, wondering if she understood why things had gone so wrong for her. The reality was that if she had approached me collegially that first morning, if she had asked questions instead of making demands, if she had been willing to learn about postal regulations, instead of insisting her HOA bylaws trumped federal law, everything would have been fine. But she had chosen confrontation over cooperation. She had chosen to escalate at every opportunity. And ultimately, she had chosen to break the law multiple times in pursuit of vindication that was never going to come. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting a little bit of authority go to your head, about the importance of knowing when to back down, and about the reality that HOA bylaws, no matter how detailed or strictly enforced, do not override the actual laws of the United States. As I walked past the mailboxes on my street, all neatly cleared and accessible, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because Deborah had faced consequences, but because the system had worked the way it was supposed to. Federal regulations had been followed, emergency services had not been unnecessarily burdened, mail had been delivered, and justice had been served. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week, and I had already confirmed I would attend. Margaret had asked if I would be willing to serve on the communications committee, helping to make sure residents understood HOA decisions and had clear channels for raising concerns. I had agreed, figuring that my experience with both the Postal Service and the snow removal incident gave me useful perspective. Life moved on as it always does. The story of the HOA president who went to jail for harassing the postmaster became local legend, occasionally mentioned in cautionary tones at neighborhood gatherings. New residents would hear the tale and look at me with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. I tried not to dwell on it too much. There were mail routes to coordinate, snowstorms to prepare for, and a whole district full of postal operations that needed my attention. The drama with Deborah had been an aberration, an unfortunate collision of circumstances that escalated beyond all reason. But it had also reinforced something I had always believed, that most conflicts can be resolved through clear communication, mutual respect, and a willingness to understand the other person's perspective. When those things break down, when someone becomes so invested in being right that they stop caring about what is actually true or legal, that is when situations spiral out of control. I made it my mission, both in my Postal Service role and in my interactions with the HOA, to model a different approach. To listen before reacting, to explain before demanding, to de-escalate before conflicts became crises. It seemed to be working. The Maple Heights HOA became known in the Burlington area as one of the most well-run and reasonable community organizations. Property values did increase, just as Deborah had always wanted, but not because of strict enforcement of arbitrary rules. They increased because people wanted to live in a neighborhood where conflicts were handled maturely, and where residents felt heard and respected. On the first anniversary of the snow removal incident, Jake sent me a photo of our truck with the plow blade, along with a text. "Remember that time you became a local legend for doing your job?" I laughed and sent back, "Remember that time someone went to jail because they could not handle snow removal protocol?" It had become something we could joke about, though it had not felt funny at the time. The absurdity of the situation had only become clear in retrospect, when the immediate stress and worry had faded. I kept Inspector Webb's card in my desk drawer, hoping I would never need to use it again, but grateful it was there if I did. He had told me at the trial that cases like this were rare, but not unheard of. That sometimes people became so fixated on perceived slights or violations that they crossed lines they never should have approached. As I settled into my evening routine that night, Biscuit curled up at my feet and the house quiet around me, I felt genuinely content. The drama was over. The neighborhood was peaceful. My job was secure and respected. And I had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply know your rights, document everything, and stand firm when you are in the right. The mailboxes of Maple Heights stood clear and accessible, just as they should be. The snow removal protocols I had implemented were now being used as a model by other postal districts across Vermont. And somewhere, Deborah Patterson was hopefully learning that authority without wisdom is a dangerous thing, and that sometimes the best way to maintain community standards is to recognize when those standards need to bow to higher laws and practical necessity. I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop one more time, reviewing them for the upcoming meeting. Margaret had asked the Communications Committee to suggest revisions that would clarify the limits of HOA authority and establish better procedures for resolving conflicts. It was exactly the kind of proactive, constructive work that should have been happening all along. As I read through the documents, I made notes about sections that needed updating, areas where federal and state law should be explicitly referenced, and procedures that would prevent future board members from abusing their positions. It was tedious work, but it was important. My phone buzzed with a text from Gerald. "Just wanted to thank you again for agreeing to help with the bylaws revision. Your input is invaluable, and I think we are going to end up with something much better than what we had." I texted back, "Happy to help. Let's make sure this never happens to anyone else." And that, really, was what it was all about. Not revenge, not vindication, not even justice, though justice had been served. It was about making sure that a temporary conflict over snow removal procedures never again escalated into criminal charges and jail time. It was about building a community where people could disagree without becoming enemies, where authority came with responsibility and restraint, where federal mail carriers could do their jobs without harassment, and where snow removal during a winter storm was recognized for what it was: a necessary public service, not a crime. The snow would fall again next winter, and the winter after that. I would be ready with my plow truck and my federal regulations and my patient explanations of how weather emergencies work. And hopefully, everyone else would be ready to simply say thank you and get on with their lives. That was the dream, anyway. And in Maple Heights, after everything we had been through, it seemed like that dream might actually come true.